Thank you very much for having me here today. It's such a privilege to be asked to speak amongst such wise speakers and experienced ones. So today I'm going to explore some of the ways in which we can harness the power of presence in one-to-one meditation teaching. And much of what I'm sharing can also be applied and adapted for working with groups. So I hope that it will be useful to you, perhaps on a few levels. I just want to check firstly how many of you are already running one-on-one sessions with people. Great, so quite a few of you. And how many of you perhaps aren't but might like to? Okay, well hopefully I'll convert more of you by the end of the session. Okay, so in a one-to-one setting, should I be pointing this somewhere in particular?
It's that one.
The second one. Okay, thanks. So in a one-to-one setting, we can find that new possibilities exist, especially the potential for deeper sharing. There's an opportunity for the student to share more deeply and completely about what's brought them to meditation, what kind of problems they're trying to solve, if any. And this can give us a much richer understanding of their motivation. We also have the luxury of more time and attention. So students can go into greater depth about what's currently going on in their practice. We also have more information in this sort of session that can help us decipher which techniques will be suitable for the student's needs. And this can inform the angle from which the teacher can come. So some people want a lot of intellectual information. They like to know about the science. Their mind kind of needs to be won over with that sort of information before they'll embrace something. And other students might be interested in managing their pain or anxiety and come from a very different place of need. So the range of needs when teaching meditation one-to-one can be quite wide and varied. And it's great to be able to tailor the teaching to the particular focus for that student. We can then meet the student wherever they're at, if they're beginners or advanced or anywhere in between, and we can potentially create a close match between the student's needs and the technique that we teach them. And when we do that, this wonderful thing can happen. The learning can become more internalised, more deeply, because it will be so relevant and useful to the students' needs. And their motivation to practice will also be stronger because it's going to support whatever their current need is for them. The learning can be very specific and detailed because with this additional time that they have to share openly, we can find out what they already know and what they've experienced, and therefore what might be the useful next step for them. And many people who come to a meditation teacher maybe have been practicing for a long time on their own. And you might find that they have gaps or misconceptions in their learning. And they have the opportunity here to correct those and support them with further learning. And this is probably my favourite point, that by the very nature of a one-to-one session, we have a wonderful opportunity to role model the holding of space, so that they can then go and do the same thing for themselves in their meditation and their self-care practice. And to me, this is a fundamental yet subtle teaching angle. And I think it's where we really see the power of presence. Because depending on where people have come from, some have never had the experience of being listened to compassionately. Before I moved into this work, I'd hardly ever experienced it. I shared in my introductory video about that first session I had with a counsellor who later became my teacher and whose listening model I'm going to share with you today, and just how powerful that interaction was for me. And I just wanted more and more of it. You know, that compassionate, wholehearted presence. And that set me on this path of learning about how to create that for myself and how to teach it to others. So today I'll be covering two sets of skills, and in the workshop this afternoon there'll be an opportunity to learn and practice some of those skills. The first is the holistic listening model by Alana Dorr, And the second is talking about grounded presence through the work, based on the work of Ken Mellor. And grounded presence works beautifully with holistic listening as a way of giving the student a sense that we are really present and compassionately available to them. It helps to build the rapport between the teacher and student so that conducting the session, the one-to-one session, almost becomes a beautiful connective practice within itself for both of you. So today, as well as exploring how to develop these two sets of skills, I'll be offering some guidelines on structuring a one-to-one session, and that's not prescriptive in any way. It's really just to give you a bit of a guide rope if you need it. So although meditation by its very nature can be therapeutic, and therapy can include meditation, what I'll be covering is not really designed to be therapy or counselling. So being a meditation teacher and a therapist are obviously quite different skill sets. Rather, my goal is, as a meditation teacher, is to be a presence of awareness and to provide understanding and appreciation for the student and their needs so that we can create a really responsive and relevant session. So our focus as meditation teachers needs to be on why they've come to the session, what they've experienced so far, and maybe what they want to experience. And this involves quite a lot of listening on our part. Perhaps not something that we might associate with being a meditation teacher. And students will often share deep internal experiences because, as we know and as we've heard, meditation opens us up to our full humanity. So whilst we don't necessarily need to counsel them, we do need to be able to manage that kind of deep interaction in a way that's both supportive and respectful. And this applies to groups as well. So what's holistic listening? Holistic listening is physically hearing what someone is saying and also being emotionally present and authentic. And we use it to stay open to the experience of the student and respond in a way that's useful. Ken Mellor, in his book Pearls, writes this story. "What can I do?" a lively young woman asked the master. "I tell people that they need to meditate and to follow what you teach, but they don't do it. They just don't seem to get it. And the more I tell them to do it in a way that I can see they need to, the less they seem to follow through." The master smiled encouragingly, recognising the woman's good-heartedness. "I think you're trying too hard," he said. Part of his response to her goes, "Ideally, we need to make contact with others with such delicacy that we barely cause a ripple, perhaps not even that. The more we disturb them, the more likely people are to react against what we do rather than embrace it. It's as if we need to approach others with the same care that we'd take when putting a flower petal on the surface of a mirror-smooth pond without causing a ripple." There's such gentleness and respect in that, isn't there? So taking this approach helps students feel safe. A sense of safety, of course, is necessary to build that rapport and also for meditation to take place. And when we use holistic listening skills, students feel heard and understood. So first of all, they can feel free to be honest. And it's important for students to be able to report on their progress or maybe their lack of progress without judgment or disapproval. When they feel like their thoughts and feelings are valued and taken seriously, then they're more likely to divulge the truth about what they're experiencing, maybe even issues around their mental health. And meditation can trigger unusual, deep, sometimes disturbing experiences. Not the kind of things we can actually talk about with most people, which can potentially make the practice a little isolating. So it's really important to feel safe in order to share these experiences and make sense of them. I remember when I was 16 and first went to the library to get a book about meditation. I was doing VCE and I grabbed a book and tried it out on my own at home, and I felt like I was rising up out of my body. And I had nobody to ask about this sort of experience. So I just took the book back to the library and never touched meditation again until much later. So I'm sure there's other people that have experienced that kind of thing before. So students can feel free to be vulnerable. It's vital to create permission for that vulnerability. Otherwise, how can we soften to the meditative experience and be open to whatever arises? We can create an authentic connection. And this influences the quality of our conversations with students and also the students' readiness to adopt new practices and ideas. And as teachers, we can respond from our heart's wisdom rather than just the mind, creating more wholehearted teaching that comes from the whole of us. The student has the time and space and the opportunity, as they're being held, to clarify their why. Their deeper motivations and the needs they want to meet through their practice. And this enables their learning to become more deeply anchored in their life, which is closer to second-order change, far more lasting, far more motivating. And as we all know, we kind of need to be motivated in order to develop a daily practice and go and sit on that cushion. The push needs to be pretty strong. It also helps us inform the choice of technique. So it gives us information about the best entry point for that student in terms of which technique will suit them. So holistic listening consists of listening to self, being aware of, as the other speakers have talked about, what's going on inside us as we're listening to the student, to sensations, feelings and thoughts. Sometimes an awareness might pop up about ourselves, and that might give us clues as to what's happening for the student. Or perhaps the content of the session might trigger an awareness of something we need to follow up on for ourselves. Listening with our eyes, so maintaining soft eye contact and watching the student's body language for information, especially if that contradicts what they're saying with their words. Listening with our hearts, listening to our feelings and the feelings that we imagine they must be feeling. And this is the foundation of empathy and connection. And it keeps us in our hearts and out of judgment, out of too much analysis, which helps us to maintain compassion. Listening with our body, so maintaining positive and open body language. Staying relaxed and keeping the body soft. As Lee was saying, just stopping and noticing, how am I holding my body? Am I soft? Am I open and relaxed? And where we notice the student's body language is closed, we can use a technique where we mirror what they're doing and then change to a more open, relaxed body stance so that they might be inclined to follow us. Listening with silence. So slowing down, allowing pauses and silent periods so that the student's thoughts can evolve organically without the pressure of constant questioning, and so that we can honour what they're sharing and they can honour what we're sharing. Listening with our intuition. So listening to insights that pop in through colours, images or words, or even sensations in the body. And listening with our words. And we can do this with some reflective listening skills, the kind of skills that are taught in parenting programs, relationship books. You're probably sick of reading about them, but they're really useful. So reflecting feelings, for example, is just saying back to the student how you think they might be feeling. And you might say, for example, oh, how frustrating, or that must have felt so uplifting. So that we offer genuine understanding and empathy for the student's meaning and experience. Reflecting content is paraphrasing back to them what you have understood that they've shared in your own words. So someone might be talking about the stress in their life because they're looking after an ageing parent And a reflecting content statement might be something like, "It sounds like you've hardly had any time to yourself with everything on your plate." So, using less questions and more statements, which is far more engaging and less interrogating. And the summarising skill, which ties together what someone's been talking about and reflects it back to them in a concise way so that we can almost wrap up a conversation and perhaps useful for when you want to move on to a meditation technique during the session. So I'll provide some training on these skills in the afternoon workshop. So this gives us a way to respond that supports students' discoveries and shows them that they've been heard and understood. And it keeps us out of adding unnecessary opinion or conjecture to the conversation. And as a meditation teacher, you are influential. You know, your words carry weight for people. And that's a responsibility to take seriously. So we can listen to people in a way that is unobtrusive and gentle, like the petal on the pond. Part of my deep interest in listening comes from parenting an adult son, now an adult, who has high-functioning autism. And there's been endless occasions where I've had to try and reach him with words and try and find a connection with him that will bring him out of his current state of depression or anxiety, or, you know, having to sometimes convince him to do things differently that he just doesn't want to do. He's been quite a tough customer. And logic and reason don't work. You know, giving advice, stories, they don't work. I found out the hard way that getting mad doesn't work either. So what does work? Well, exactly what I've been describing. You know, speaking to him like he's someone I love, honouring his experience and what he's going through, and being really emotionally present for him. It's like it just melts everything else away. And reflecting back to him his strengths with that wholehearted honesty and authenticity. And that's the only thing that works. It's been an amazing training ground for me. And it's funny, but even my 5-year-old, who's not autistic, you know, I have to approach him in a different way, but I actually have to use the same skills. So if I question him, he's in the car coming home from kinder, and if I say to him, you know, "How was your day? Tell me all about your day," he just shuts down and won't tell me anything. But if I start using statements about my day, then he'll start talking. And if I reflect feelings back to him, he will talk and talk and talk and talk about everything that's been going on for him. And even when he's having a bit of a meltdown or a tantrum, you know, just bringing in that validation. "Oh, you look like you're feeling angry at the moment." It's like he just goes, yeah, that's it, that's how I'm feeling. And the other stuff can just melt away. So I actually no longer see it as a set of professional skills. I actually see it as a way of communicating that brings a lot of gentleness and authenticity to all my interactions. Not that I remember to use it all the time, of course, but it's a beautiful way to be with people. And so what's the best way to practice? Well, I think, you know, just choose a couple of people in your life that you would like to practice these skills with, and children are excellent. But, you know, it could just be anyone that you decide. And most importantly, you have a wonderful subject right here, and that's you. So in his writing about the petal on the pond, Ken says, "What we do with others, we are doing with ourselves in some way." If we find it challenging to hold this space for others, then maybe we first need to work on holding it for ourselves. And why not? It's a very valuable practice. So we need to experience the joy and the disturbance of making those internal discoveries through our practice. Being your own yogi, being the urban mystic, you know, playing around with it, it's great, fun. We need to know what it feels like to receive this support of really feeling heard and validated on a regular basis through our own self-care. That's when we get the really deep value of doing it, of what we get out of it. And then doing it for others is just like a natural extension of that practice. we can develop a heightened sense of our own needs so that we can more easily identify them in others. And we can practice being available to whatever we find with an undefended heart, increasing our comfort with emotional honesty and vulnerability in others. We can get to know the value and importance of setting safe emotional boundaries and mental boundaries. And this is fundamental for a good self-care practice. It involves setting boundaries with ourselves so that we maintain the discipline that's required, and setting boundaries with others in order to make the time and the space to practice. Sometimes it's just that sign outside the door saying Mum can't be disturbed for half an hour. And as we work on our unfinished business in therapy or with a mentor, as well as in our practice, we can avoid traps like looking to our students for approval, which prevents us from being truly present with them. Attending to our unfinished business also helps to sharpen our intuition, because we can know more clearly what is an emotional projection from the past or what is an actual intuitive insight that I need to share with the student. And that's a really important distinction to be able to make. It's really valuable to be able to make it. And I personally love receiving this kind of support. I don't know about you, but it feels so wonderful to be feeling heard, to be validated, to be supported in this way so that I can get through life challenges better. And I feel like then I'm working at the edge of myself so that I'm clearer in working with others. Because however, it's easy to avoid this. It's easy to avoid going and doing this work because it's where our wounding is. It doesn't feel particularly good at times. So some ways to listen to ourselves. Well, one of my favourites is journaling, either before or after meditation or both, or during. Practicing listening to the body, whether it's through meditation or mindfulness. Using relaxation practices to maintain an open, soft body and to keep that emotional energy moving so it doesn't get contracted and held in the body. Using meditation to listen to and support your feelings. Again, it's that feeling of being heard and validated. Things like the one-seat meditation, self-compassion practices, mindfulness of feelings. Working with a mentor or therapist. It's not something we really talk about in meditation teaching. Working with a supervisor, working with a teacher. It can really keep us edgy and really help support us so that not as much of that projection is happening with others. We may think, well, we're just a teacher, we're not a therapist, but gee, that line is blurred. Especially when you're working with groups, a lot of people come to meditation groups that probably need to be in therapy. And this may be their way through. It may be just about establishing trust and rapport with other people first before they can be referred or go somewhere else. So it's wonderful to be able to support them. Cultivating activities that increase your sense of I amness. Play and fun, creative expression, the arts, sports, whatever it is that you enjoy. And one of my favourites is listening to nature and spending time in nature, as Janet was saying. Listening to the messages through the colours, the images, the energy, and allowing insights to flow. I personally love just walking by the creek near my house and just seeing the random imperfection of nature. The fallen trees, the weeds, the flowers that just grow out of crazy places, the branches, whatever else. It's all so far from perfect, it actually looks so chaotic, but it's so beautiful. And it just helps me to feel a bit more accepting of my own humanity. When you look at that mess and you think, but that's beautiful, then I think, all right, well, maybe I'm okay. So the degree to which you're giving this support to yourself will impact the level of authenticity that you can offer others. So holistic listening goes hand in hand with grounded presence, and we can actually do them simultaneously because they complement each other so well. Very simply, grounding involves, and a few people have talked about grounding already, an awareness of what we're hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, smelling in the outer world. And whilst we're listening holistically to the other person, we can be aware of that sensation of our feet against the floor, our back against the chair, the weight of our body in the chair. And we can actually go back and forth between that inner and outer awareness. And this in itself, this practice can create this lovely sense of equilibrium and kind of evenness that keeps us centred in the moment, in the here and now, in the present, which is what we've all been talking about. So the act of being grounded means we're plugged into the physical world through our 5 senses, and this enables us to be present to what's going on, as well as connected to our inner knowing, our inner world, our beingness. And when we do this, we can hold space so effectively because we've got both. We've got that inner connection, the inner beingness, and the outer. We've plugged it in a sense, we've grounded it. And we'll explore this with some practices in the workshop. So grounded presence means staying grounded, open and available to whatever's going on for the other person and what we're experiencing within ourselves. And actually, as we stay grounded, we actually draw the student in to their own version of that calm, to their own version of that groundedness, just through doing it ourselves. So let's look at how to use holistic listening and grounded presence in a session. These are just guidelines and suggestions for you to do whatever you like with. I like to do a bit of preparation before a session, so you can create, and I do this for one-on-ones, for workshops, retreats, anything. Create a sense of welcoming and rapport before the session's even begun by emailing out some questions beforehand to get the student thinking about what they want to get out of the session. And then, so questions like, what kind of meditation have you tried in the past? What would you like to achieve in this session? Anything like that. And then refer to their responses in your opening comments in the session. And then that allows them to feel like, this person's listening to me, they're interested, they're engaged with me. And it also begins a preparation process for the session. Within that first email or those first couple of emails, you may also like to send out a link or an attachment with your privacy policy, your payment policy and your cancellation policy so that everyone's clear on the boundaries. And be clear on the applications of the techniques that you're using. So in your own practice, get very clear on the individual steps of any techniques and only teach the techniques that you're really familiar with. Students may have their own expectations of what they think you should know, but that's about them, that's not about you. And I think that can throw new meditation teachers out a bit, but you don't need to be worried about that. If you don't already do this in your teaching, it can help to have a journal next to you whilst you're meditating. And then you can just note down as you go the features, the benefits, the outcomes of particular types of meditation, so that when you're presented with different needs in the session, you'll have it all available to you to recall because you'll have that felt experience in your own practice. And you may like to have your own recordings available for sale or as part of the session, you might include them. I like to use the client's phone usually to record whatever practice we're doing in the session so that there's no hassle. You don't have to send out links. You don't have to send over audios. They've got it there. They can take it straight away with them. So I like to, just in structuring the sessions and again, remembering lots of flexibility, I like to allow more time for that first session, so you might book an hour and a half instead of an hour. And in that first session, use holistic listening to find out about the student's background, their experience, before you begin meditating with them. Get very clear on a lot of things and clarify their needs through listening and reflecting. pull out the key things that they're saying, reflect back what you understand, so that the student has a chance to correct you if you don't have it right. And you don't have to get it right. There's no need to worry about that. They will let you know. And then aim to answer 2 questions. How do you feel? And what do you need? And you'll be able to answer those questions with your reflective listening skills. Then you might set goals if that feels appropriate with a particular student. And then decide which would be an appropriate technique to share, considering their needs, considering their background, considering what they've shared, and practice it together so that you're meditating with them. And this gives you a better sense of timing when you're guiding the meditation. And it also means they'll reap the benefits of meditating with an experienced meditator. And we all know how good that can feel. It can give them a bit of a boost. And you might then either record the instructions on paper or have them already there or on their phone or however you might do it. And doing this also allows the arising of any difficulties or adverse reactions whilst they're still with you. So they can debrief and you can explain and make adjustments to the technique. And then you can make a plan on how they're going to use the practice. So it can be useful to introduce a logbook or a journal, and that's something they can use at home to record their experiences. And that can be helpful for coming back to see you in subsequent sessions, because if they've done a week or 2 weeks of home practice, they're not going to remember all the details. It's really good to be able to write things down. Sometimes people will come back and not think something's important, but if you've got it all written down, you can kind of go through it together. So some teachers worry about keeping control of time in a one-to-one session, which, can be a concern. So I would recommend setting a specific time for talking and listening and a time for meditation, and communicating this clearly in the session. So you might say something like, okay, we're going to spend the first half of the session learning more about you, and in the second half we're going to try a practice. And if you need to, you might keep giving them feedback on how time's progressing, and just pause and give them options. Things like, we've got 20 minutes left in the session, let's start meditating together. Don't leave the time open-ended, otherwise you might only end up with 5 minutes at the end to meditate. And sometimes this might mean interrupting them, and just use a soft, tentative, gentle approach and to soften that interruption. You can also use that summarising skill to draw together the threads of what they've been saying and then allow you to move on to something else. Okay. So in subsequent sessions, after that first session, this is where it starts to get really flexible. You might discuss how their practice is going, debrief, get them to talk through their logbook, address any problems or celebrate any wonderful things that have happened for them as well. And in debriefing around problems, you can go through 3 main questions or 3 main ideas. What happened? How did it feel? And what does it mean? You might address new needs as they arise. And often, when people begin, that's when they actually start to realise what's actually there. Sometimes the initial thing they came to see you for may change as their awareness of what's actually going on internally increases. And each session can be different, so don't get too caught up in how things should be. Okay, so I like to have a bit of a resource folder. So, in your session, you might have that as an actual folder. If you're working online, you might have that as an electronic folder. And one of the things I have in there is a reading list with some good mental food to assist people's understanding and motivation. Perhaps some links to your own recordings that could be purchased or might be given as part of the session. Some instructions for particular kinds of meditations that you might commonly teach. Referral lists to a good range of therapists, maybe even yoga schools, counsellors, therapists, psychologists, even natural health practitioners. You know, the physical body is a big part of meditation. Assessment tools to help them gauge their progress and log sheets. And I'll show you some examples of those in the workshop this afternoon. And some information sheets like how to get the most out of your meditation session, and especially things like being mindful of what you do straight after a one-to-one session. You know, are you rushing back to work, or are you maybe going for a walk in the park or something? Having these resources can actually take the pressure off how much you need to cover in the session. So you may or may not know someone's full history. You might ask, but they might not tell you, and they may understate it. So I think it's good to play it safe and just be really gentle with people right from the beginning. There's been a lot of information provided by Meditation Australia through the Bruno Canyon talk on mental health and meditation teaching, so I'm not going to go to any of that. I'm just going to give a couple of very practical little tips on how to handle difficulties if they come up. Remember too that the reported level of experience doesn't always reflect people's competence or comfort with meditation, especially if they've never worked with a teacher before. So always start with gentle techniques and monitor how they're going. For me, that would be things like grounding, moving meditation, body scans, things like that. But you might have your own set in what you've learnt. When introducing a new technique, always try it in the session together first, so that you can pick up on any obvious reactions or challenges. Introduce one thing at a time, if possible. Use shorter meditations for beginners. And explore any unusual responses. So you might ask something like, tell me what was going on for you when you experienced that, or you look upset, tell me about it. Don't just leave things, don't just take it for granted that they'll be okay. You know, just delve a little bit if you see that someone's looking agitated or bothered. So if someone does become highly agitated, or they start to get angry or frightened, then you need to stop and deal with that. And it might mean stopping the meditation. And just talk very calmly in a normal voice without sounding anxious. And just talk about what's happening. Just even for them to talk about what's happening can be very calming. Try not to parent them, because that might trigger them further. Just talk calmly and normally. And try not to ask questions. Instead, keep going with making statements. Aim for an outcome where the person can leave the session without any concern, where you might ground them by bringing an awareness to their outer senses, to their body, to their weight on the chair. All that kind of grounding stuff is very good. Just some compassionate talking support. Of course, your list of referrals will be invaluable. And just make sure they're okay before they leave. As I said, if the meditation is triggering them, then stop the meditation. So it's important also to have first aid training. And also never to see I don't recommend anyway, that you see new clients at home. I think at all times you need to a system where someone can come to your aid if they need to. Because it's important not to be naive about these things. I've come very close to some pretty dangerous situations. I don't know about any of you, but really disturbing situations. So it's very important that you really look after yourself. Okay, let's look at some things to keep in mind when conducting one-to-one sessions online. I think for students to start off with, we need to be clear with boundaries. And that can be in your pre-session information that you send to them. So ensuring things like they're in a private space that they feel comfortable and safe in. If at work, they're in a private room, not in the office with everyone else, not in the car when driving. Being in a public place is not an emotionally safe place for a meditation session. You'd be surprised. So being very clear with those boundaries and really sticking to them. Creating a set, so being aware of what's visible behind you when you're teaching online. So removing the personal belongings and things like that, maybe just having a plant, kind of creating a little set for yourself Keeping all your devices plugged in for the duration of the session, because those video kind of conferencing and things can drain batteries very quickly. Have a backup phone number. So have the person's phone number so that you and know that their phone will be on so that you can call them in case you get interrupted in a session. You might use your electronic resource folder to be able to send them links and things like that. And always use a camera so that you can see what's going on for that other person and so they can see you, so that you're able to pick up on anything that needs to be picked up on. Remember that when you're working online, there's less body language visible. So you may need to check in verbally a bit more frequently to see how they're going. So the power of presence and the impact that this can have on rapport and learning apply to all our relationships and interactions. These skills in holistic listening and grounded presence can enhance how you run groups and particularly how you handle the discussion after meditation. And this is something I've seen meditation teachers struggle with. They love the meditation part, but perhaps find it a bit more challenging to conduct the discussion. So I really encourage you to have a play with some of these skills and see what happens. What I enjoy most about teaching meditation in any context, but particularly one-on-one, is the joy of that connection and rapport without the pressure of counselling. So that level of rapport can be created with these skills, but it can be done in a way that's kind of meaningful and connective, but also light. The metaphor of Ken's petal on the pond is a reminder that our presence and our gentle support is enough. And that most of the work actually takes place in our own practice so that we can provide and be that grounded presence for others. So I'd just like to leave you with a poem by an unknown author. When I ask you to listen to me and you start giving advice, you've not done what I asked. When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you're trampling on my feelings. When I ask you to listen to me and you feel you have to do something to solve my problems, you've failed me, strange as that may seem. Listen. All I ask is that you listen. Not talk or do, just hear me. And I can do for myself. I'm not helpless. Maybe discouraged and faltering, but not helpless. When you do something for me that I can and need to do for myself, you contribute to my fear and weakness. But when you accept as a simple fact that I do feel what I feel, no matter how irrational, then I quit trying to convince you and can get about the business of understanding what's behind this irrational feeling. And when that's clear, the answers are obvious, and I don't need advice. Thank you.